Welcome to Coffee Break with Rachel Vigil, taking a daily look at the biggest stories in Denver sports and interacting live with you, the Coffee Break fam. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe, and enjoy your coffee break. Here's your host, Rachel Vigil.
We are not Rachel Vigil. He's Andrew Mason. I'm Will Peterson. Excited to be with you on this Friday morning. Mace, it is Rachel's birthday, so she is off today. Happy birthday to Rachel.
You know what? I agree with taking the birthday off. I'm lucky on the football calendar that my birthday falls during a dead period, so it's very easy for me to take it off. But I am pro turn your birthday into a holiday. That's something I firmly believe in.
Yes, we wish Rachel a happy birthday. We know all you out there who tune in to watch her every day do as well. She'll be back next week, but for today, Mace and I will take you through the latest and greatest around the NFL and in Bronco land, as John Elway would say. Mace, let's start with the future of Russell Wilson, because there are many ways Russell Wilson's future can play out. We're going to get to the stuff with Pete Carroll in a little bit, I promise. We're not going to start there. But we are going to start with a question that I was pondering yesterday. Actually, the great Cecil Lammy was pondering it with me. And it is, could Russ stay in the AFC West? I think all Broncos fans expect Russ to be on a new team. That will be a little weird. But if Russ plays for the Atlanta Falcons, it won't be that weird. He was only here for 2 seasons.
Except, Atlanta comes to Denver next year.
Okay, so you would see him once. But you wouldn't every Sunday be like, man, that's weird seeing him in a Falcons uniform. You would just kind of move on with your life.
Yes, exactly.
However, if he's in a Las Vegas Raiders uniform, staying in the AFC West, we know he's not going to Kansas City, obviously. He's not going to Los Angeles. But could he go to Las Vegas? And, Mace, how weird would that be for Broncos country that you trade for this guy, you extend him, it doesn't work, and then he goes and plays for the Raiders?
Well, effectively, you'd be paying him to play for the Raiders as well if that happened. This is part of the other thing. Wherever Russell Wilson goes, assuming you move on from him before the 5th day of the league year, if he lands somewhere else, you are paying him to play for that team, right? There is offset language in the contract, but if you're another team, you're structuring that contract and what you give him to make sure that the offset is minimized, and it would be in particular the base salary, right? So you'd probably have a contract that had a decent signing bonus and a base salary that was the league minimum for a 13-year veteran, which would be a little over $1 million. So it would be really weird. I mean, I think we're probably putting the cart before the horse a little bit here because we don't know who the Raiders coach is going to be and what they're going to want. It's fascinating to go through the possibilities. And look, I mean, maybe that list of possibilities for Russell Wilson ends up being smaller than you might expect, because some teams may say, you know what, we're going to go with a rookie, cast our lot with one of these rookies that you can potentially get in the first round, or go with someone who is maybe more suited to be a bridge quarterback than somebody who's been a starter for 12 years, and despite the last 2 years, may well still have a Hall of Fame resume based on what he did with Seattle.
Yeah, so you say something interesting there, and that's why this last game of the season, I was so, hammering the table, it is better if they lose. And I know you did polls about that, and I know Broncos country had a lot of strong opinions about that. But look, I mean, I don't say I was right often, but I was right on this one, because look at the draft order. Mm-hmm. They are now ahead of the Raiders, the Denver Broncos are, in the draft selection. And imagine if the Broncos take the last first rounder off the board. There was a mock draft on ESPN the other day that had them taking J.J. McCarthy at 12. Mm-hmm. We can get into that in a little bit, but let's just say, and then it had no QBs the rest of the first round. So let's say the Broncos get, quote unquote, the last first rounder, and then the Raiders, maybe they do scramble to sign Russell Wilson. So the draft position was important. I know the game was frustrating to watch, but let's be honest, Broncos country, it was better they lost the last game of the season in Las Vegas. But also, Mace, you mentioned it. We don't know who the coach is. Is there any chance Aiden O'Connell is still with the Raiders, or do you think no matter if it's Antonio Pierce or someone else, they're going to be QB hunting?
I actually think there's a very good chance Aiden O'Connell is back. I think he's back in some capacity no matter what, because at minimum he showed enough to where he can be a long-term backup option, no matter who they bring in. And if the Raiders do go drafting the quarterback, certainly they could go with Aiden O'Connell until that rookie is ready. And there may well still be some untapped upside with Aiden O'Connell. He was out at the Shrine Game the Shrine Game Bowl practices last January in Las Vegas, and there were some flashes, but I can see why he fell into the third day. There was some hype about him going in. He really didn't live up to it, but the guy that was playing out there for the Raiders, especially at the last 3 or 4 games, looked like somebody who could have something to say about the Raiders' starting quarterback position. I would actually say this, depending on the scheme, I'm not sure that Russell Wilson would be a huge upgrade on Aiden O'Connell based on what we saw the very end of the season, the last 3 games or so. He was extremely efficient down the stretch for the Raiders. So you probably start with that Charger game where they lit up the LA for 63 points. Yes, some of that was on the Chargers being in 1-2-3 Cancun mode and wanting to get Brandon Staley gone, it would seem, the way they played. But you've got to take advantage of that. Aiden O'Connell made some nice throws in that game. And although you saw last Sunday, he missed some makeable throws, but he made some nice throws, and clearly he was better than Jarrett Stidham in that game, right?
Yeah, no, he definitely was better than Stidham. There's no doubt about that. I agree with you. He'll be in their plans in some capacity. So let's say that the Raiders maybe aren't the landing spot for Russ. What other teams do you think, as we sit here on January 12th, are on the radar for Russell Wilson, or Russell Wilson is on their radar? It takes 2 to tango.
Mm-hmm.
How many realistic teams out there, Mace, landing spots are there for Russ? And I'm not talking about holding the clipboard. I'm talking about being a starter week 1. I would be curious to know if you think it's 2 teams, 4 teams, 6 teams, or 0 teams.
Let me go through it in my mind here, because Washington, I think probably not, because they're picking number 2 overall. Their coach hires me fascinating. We learned this morning they're hiring Adam Peters as their general manager. Was a Bronco executive several years ago, most recently with the 49ers, working with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. So that would seem to scream quarterback there at number 2 overall. The Patriots, by moving on from Bill Belichick, they're putting out the smoke signal. They're in rebuild mode. That's a QB. Chicago, who knows where they could go. See, there's even a possibility out there they could keep Justin Fields and still pick a quarterback. I mean, so if you've got QBs 1, 2, 3, then if you're sitting there and you're Atlanta, you're Pittsburgh, because I don't think anybody thinks Mason Rudolph is going to be the starter next year. He might be back as a backup, but they're duct taping this thing to, and they might even duct tape their way all the way to the divisional round, because they're getting a wacky weather forecast in Buffalo on Sunday that's basically has the chance to neutralize the weapons that the Bills have. Sure. So you're talking Pittsburgh, you're talking Atlanta, the Raiders, as we've just mentioned. Minnesota's one maybe to keep an eye on as well, because they might move off of Kirk Cousins, at which point Kirk Cousins would be a possibility for all those other teams. Probably not the Broncos, because Cousins is going to command a pretty robust salary going into the future here. So I doubt that marriage happens. The other thing is Minnesota may just look at all the options and say, Are we really going to do better right now? There are rumblings that they were trying to move up in the draft last year, particularly take Anthony Richardson, who went to Indianapolis. But we saw what happened to the Vikings as they were trying to figure things out with Nick Mullins and Jaron Hall and Josh Dobbs in the wake of losing Cousins. It sapped whatever momentum they had. So, shoot, I mean, it's a pretty limited list. I'd have to look at the cap situation for the New York Giants, but after Daniel Jones' injury, and Jones was not that great, he does have a long-term deal. Maybe they take a look at Russell Wilson, but that wouldn't be as cut and dry as handing him the keys and and saying you're the guy.
Right.
it might be battling with Daniel Jones and even Tyrod Taylor if he comes back as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up a good point there. Atlanta and Pittsburgh, to me, seem like the two most logical. They're the teams we've kind of tossed around the last few weeks, and then maybe a couple wild cards, like you said, a Minnesota, a Vegas, and New York Giants.
And I would say with Atlanta, pardon me, they may well be the favorites to land Bill Belichick as head coach. And Belichick isn't going to want to sit around and develop a quarterback. I mean, he did try that with Mac Jones the last couple of years. If he goes to Atlanta, he's going there to try to win right away. And the funny thing is, like, that is actually a pretty good roster aside from the quarterback. It's a better roster
on that team.
It's a better roster than the Broncos have overall, for example. Okay, you've got depth at the skill position players. You should be able to run the ball well, which does complement with Russell Wilson, right? Like Seattle ran the ball well for most of his time as quarterback. And Tampa Bay, a 9-8 division champion, a very underwhelming division champion, took advantage of that division, of a soft schedule. They won the tiebreaker with New Orleans to get that division. The point being, if Bill Belichick takes that Atlanta job with that roster, he may look at Russell Wilson as the best shortcut to get back to contention and back to the playoffs where Belichick is accustomed to being. And look, I mean, the first Belichick World Championship in New England was with Tom Brady. Tom Brady was not Tom Brady as we came to know him eventually. No, he was not. That was very much a team that was riding defense, a consistent if unspectacular running game, some clutch plays by a pretty pedestrian group of wide receivers at that point. That's the kind of equation that may well work in Atlanta, and you may just say, okay, with Russell Wilson, try not to mess things up early. Let's try to win these things late on some last-minute drives, and it might actually work for Atlanta if that's the path they choose to take.
All right, you bring up Belichick. Let's move on to Pete Carroll, because apparently Russ and Pete Carroll are besties once again, Mace. This story is fascinating to me. James Marilat and I spent a long time on it last night on Denver Sports Tonight on 104.3 The Fan, every night 6 to 7 p.m. if you want to check that out. Mace, Russell Wilson sends Pete Carroll a nice tweet when we find out he's not going to be the Seahawks head coach. Okay, whatever. Not that hard to send a nice tweet. Nice gesture. Excuse me. Then Russell Wilson gets on an airplane in, a minute's notice. Nice to have a private jet, right? And gets from – we thought it was Denver. There's been some reporting that it was from San Diego. Gets from San Diego to Seattle at a moment's notice. Goes to Pete Carroll's retirement party, even though he's not retiring, his goodbye to the Seahawks party, in the same room with Richard Sherman, which we can talk about that, Cam Chancellor, Tyler Lockett, Jermaine Kearse, Bobby Wagner, star-studded group of former Seahawks and current Seahawks to come celebrate Pete Carroll and all he did for that organization. What do you make of all this? And was the divorce between Russ and Pete just totally overblown?
I have to reiterate the point that James made last night on Denver Sports Tonight, that a lot of these conflicts are actually overblown in the public, that when you're actually dealing with them, there's a lot more nuance to it. I was reminded of it watching the documentary that ESPN did on Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells last night, the two Bills, and it got into how, they kind of disagreed, for years, and they didn't really get along. It was really frosty. And, there are ebbs and flows in any professional relationship that lasts as long as it did for Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. They were together for 11 seasons. In the NFL, that's a long-ass time. But ultimately, when you are removed from that, you have some distance from it, you reflect on the good times, the things that you did accomplish. And I think that, and I think that's what that is about. It's, a reflection of the fact that they did do a heck of a lot. Now, with Richard Sherman, we know that on his critiques that have gone on the Amazon Prime broadcasts,
yes,
he's taken it to another level a couple of times, right?
Oh, you remember when he was in Denver for Broncos Colts last year? He thought it was hilarious that Russell Wilson couldn't find KJ Hamler and threw all those picks late in that ugly Thursday night loss.
Yeah, the game that I think briefly made Al Michaels question all of his life choices, right? The way he was calling that game. But, I mean, now that being said, I mean, there were what, like 12 or 13 of them there with Pete Carroll? It looked like in that picture. I'd have to go back.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of them. I know he only tagged like 7 of them, and they were all big games.
He didn't tag Sherm.
Well, there was some weirdness there.
He didn't tag. He put the ID, but not the link. Right? It was like weird.
So either like Sherm untagged it, or that one of them blocked the other one, or something. Who knows?
Yes, it's a little weird there, but that was a large enough gathering to where if Russ didn't want to have a word with Sherm, he wouldn't have to, right?
No.
You're sitting, you're in a room. People are milling about, talking. If you're around a big table, you can sit them at opposite ends of the table. I mean, I don't think that was that big a deal, but yeah, I know it's going to have everyone speculating, like, oh, well, would Russ go with Pete Carroll? I don't think Pete Carroll's coaching this year myself, but we'll
all
see.
right. So actually, no, that was my next question. And I put my conspiracy hat on last night, and said, is this laying the groundwork for getting the band back together? Because you don't think he's coaching. I actually do think he wants to coach. I took it as they said, oh, you're going to be an advisor, and they just expected him to agree to that. And Pete's like, whoa, I'm not anyone's advisor. I'm here to coach the football team, and the Seahawks wanted to go in a different direction. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm not. But it just – I mean, Mace, he drops everything and gets on a plane. And I get it. He's got a private jet. But the timing of that was just so curious to me. I'm not ruling it out that Russ and Pete could be a package deal in a new city. That's all I'm saying.
Well, for them to be a package deal together, Pete Carroll would have to go to a clearly QB needy place, right?
Which is most of the openings, to be fair.
Yeah, but I'll give you an example. I don't think this would happen, but let's say that Pete Carroll wound up with the Titans. Well, part of the job there would be you're riding Will Levis for a little bit here because he looked really promising in the back half of the season.
Sure.
Especially late in that Miami game, there were definitely some flashes. He basically, I came out of that season looking at Will Levis and thinking, boy, he went in the second round basically because Rich Scangarello messed him up in his senior year at Kentucky, right?
Right. Small world that, Skang ended up at Kentucky with Levis after looking good with Drew Lock for those 5 games in 2019 in Denver.
Yeah, and Skangs got fired because they underachieved at UK with Levis. But I digress. But the point is, you kind of look around, you look at that. Let's say Pete Carroll goes on the Chargers radar, right? At some point, if somehow Jim Harbaugh stays at Michigan, I mean, it's been very quiet on that, by the way, since in the last few days.
It has.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
But let's say it's not going to be Harbaugh, but clearly LA wants a big name. That's why there have been rumors about Bill Belichick, although I think Atlanta probably has more organizational wherewithal and organizational resources to be able to tell Bill, all right, whatever you want, here it is. It's also very interesting with Atlanta that the coach search is widely taking place independent of their general manager Terry Fontenot, which is like it's Arthur Blank, it's Rich McKay who basically runs things on a day-to-day basis, and then some people close to Arthur Blank, right? It
has George Payton vibes a season ago. George Payton did not hire Sean Payton.
Right, although Payton was involved in the inner circle of things in a way that Terry Fontenot does not appear to be, which is really, really interesting. But yeah, it's interesting. You kind of go through the jobs. I don't know if there's an obvious fit for Pete Carroll, unless something kind of falls through somewhere. I mean, I would say, Washington's probably going to hire, probably going to look for kind of a young offensive guru. There are people linking them to Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator. Johnson's very much in play in Carolina as well. He may well be Carolina's first choice, but Johnson will have options in Carolina without a first round pick this year may not be his first choice. And it's hard for me to see Pete Carroll being the coach in Carolina right now, right?
Yeah, I don't think he's signing up for a rebuild.
They're trying. Yeah, he's not signing up for that, and they're trying to develop Bryce Young and figure things out there. So
yeah. All right, well, just
I'm not sure there's an obvious spot for Pete Carroll is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Russ and Pete, best buddies all again. You can read about it at denversports.com. Russ and Pete hanging out in Seattle on a moment's notice, or at least it felt like a moment's notice, a few hours' notice. Russ gets up there for his retirement party. Let's move on to the draft because you had an interesting story yesterday at denversports.com about Fox Sports' Joel Klatt, obviously friend of the program, 104.3 The Fan. He's on all the time, specifically with Schlereth and Evans. We love Joel. I think Gus and Joel are my favorite announcer duo, college or pro, right now to listen to on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. So good to have Joel on the station and good to sort of hear from him and have you write these pieces up because I think they're really informative. But I'm just curious, Mace. His latest one, Bo Nix, Drew Brees. Do explain, do tell me if you agree, because this one caught a lot of folks' attention.
Yeah, and admittedly, you write the headline to a story like this that's very much leaning into the whoa factor, right, of Bo Nix being compared to Drew Brees. So the exact quote that Joel Klatt said was, quote, about Bo Nix, quote, he, I think, in a lot of ways reminds me of Drew Brees, although not as prolific of a passer and more athletic as a runner. So I would start there by saying, okay, so he's not exactly Drew Brees. But what he did say was that he talked about him as a point guard kind of quarterback, a distributor. And that part is very Brees-esque. Compared to Michael Penix Jr., we've talked about a lot. Penix is a quarterback who, in terms of the types of throws he can make, he's got all the clubs in his bag. You know, he can get the ball out quick and dump it off. He can get it in timing on slant routes to his receivers. He can lob it downfield. He can fire bullets in the red zone. Like basically, if you gave Teddy Bridgewater the ability to fire bullets inside the 20-yard line, which is the thing that he really could have used and he didn't have, that's what you'd have with Michael Penix Jr. With Bo Nix, part of it is we haven't seen all of that. The systems he's been in have been a little bit more limited in scope, and it was something that Klatt did point out. He's called a bunch of Bo Nix's games over the years, and he said that Bo Nix, quote, was never asked to do what he'd be asked to do in the NFL, unquote. And so it's interesting when I watch Nix and I watch Penix. Nix probably is going to need more incubation time because he's going to have to learn some of the rhythm and timing things and the intermediate throws that you're going to have to execute in the NFL that he's not doing really at Oregon. Now, this isn't to say he doesn't have that ability. I think he's got a lot of natural tools to him, but you may be waiting a little bit longer on Bo Nix. Just like if you draft J.J. McCarthy, I think you've got to basically use the first year as a redshirt year. If I have McCarthy, the only way he's playing that year is the old Steve McNair plan with the late former Oilers, Titans, Ravens quarterback. When the Oilers got him in 1995, they played him the last 2 games of his first season. Then he went back to the bench, and he played the last couple of games of his second season, and he started in year 3. That's the type of plan I'd be considering for J.J. McCarthy. Bo Nix, you might be basically saying, okay, he's not playing until you're out of it in year 1 with the intention of him starting in year 2, but he's going to have to learn some of these concepts. And also because of he's learning these concepts, we got to figure things out on him. Can he go through progressions at a pro level? That's something that we don't know at this point. We know he can do some things off schedule, and so that's a positive. But we don't yet know if he can kind of be patient in the pocket, if he can process things as they happen, if he can kind of go 1, 2, 3, 4 in his progressions. These are things that he wasn't really asked to do at Auburn and Oregon, and he's going to have to learn those, and it's why you're going to have to play the long game with him, I think. But the talent, there's no doubt, he has talent. He has pro talent, but you're going to have to be patient with him. Can Sean Payton be that?
Well, and here's the elephant in the room. It's the last name you mentioned there. If Joel Klatt is going to compare, and I understand he didn't say Bo Nix, a future Hall of Famer, are going to lead the NFL in passing, but
Right.
even put Bo Nix and Drew Brees in the same breath.
Yeah.
All we keep hearing about is Sean Payton loved Drew Brees because Drew ran his system. They had this great relationship, et cetera, et cetera. So you look at these 6 quarterbacks, Williams, May, Daniels, Penix, McCarthy. I'm missing one.
Jaden Daniels.
No, I said Daniels. Nix.
So Nix, yeah.
The guy we're talking about, duh. The guy I missed is the guy we're talking about. You look at the 6, right? And maybe 2 or 3 of them are unattainable unless you make a monster trade. Caleb Williams unattainable, Drake May unattainable. But, Mace, to me, if Bo Nix can be in the same breath as Drew Brees, that instantly makes him the favorite to be the next Broncos quarterback because that's what Sean Payton's been looking for. Do you see my logic there?
I get what you're saying. And that's the question is, does Sean Payton see it that way? Now,
Joel's
one
a
thing that
brilliant
is,
football mind. He sees it that way. I think Sean's got to see a little of that too. He just does. That's how these football guys think.
Here's the other thing on Joel Klatt that you have to note. He was very briefly a New Orleans Saint under Sean Payton. He actually was with the Saints for part of the offseason in 2006. Didn't make it to the preseason, didn't make it to the roster, but he was there for a minute. And oh, by the way, there was a dude in there named Drew Brees. He just arrived as a free agent with the Saints. That's how long ago this was. It was 17 years ago.
Interesting.
So this is why I'll say that I do take Joel's analysis and consider it because, however briefly, he does have an idea of how Sean Payton operates and what Sean Payton's looking for from the quarterback position. So that's why I think it's really interesting to note this, not just because he's a friend of the program and he's a local guy, but because he's been around Sean Payton as a player, however briefly. That being said, it is interesting to note that he says this about Nix, but then in the same conversation, you can read about that at denversports.com, identifies Penix as a Sean Payton type of quarterback.
Okay.
And I've said it before, I'll say it again with Penix. If not for the injury history, you'd be talking about him being in that upper part of the first round conversation with Caleb Williams, Drake May, and it appears Jaden Daniels has worked his way there as well. The medicals are going to tell the tale entirely on Michael Penix Jr. Right now, I'd say he's probably the lead of that second class. And then the other question the Broncos are going to have to answer is, all right, we like these guys. Maybe we like Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. and J.J. McCarthy. Maybe we like their potential, but are we okay standing pat, or do we get starry-eyed when we look at the possibility of Caleb Williams or Drake May running this offense, and how do we get them here? Right. And what do we have to sacrifice to make that happen? It would be a lot, no doubt, going from 12-1 or 12-2. But is that that's the thing you have to think about. Basically, the way I kind of view it is very simple. It's what's a better team, hypothetically speaking? Michael Penix or Bo Nix at quarterback with Pat Surtain and whoever you get in next year's first round and maybe the first round of the year after, or Caleb Williams or Drake May at quarterback, but you don't have those unnamed first round picks to be determined and you don't have Pat Surtain. I think ultimately in overall roster building, you're probably better off going with the latter. And if you move up from 12, it's not a huge move up. It's like the cost of a second or a third round pick to move up a couple of slots.
Well, it is the billion-dollar question. It's one we will ponder many a times between now and the draft. And I'm sure Rachel Vigil will talk about it next week as well. We wish Rachel a happy birthday. Mace, appreciate your time. Will. Rachel will be back next week. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.